Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to you here and to the over 6,000 people who have registered online for this evening with us, thinking about the business of implications of AI in the Think Ahead series. I'm Michael Jacobidis. I'm the Sir Donald Gordon Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and Professor of Strategy. I study industry evolution, value migration, digital platforms and ecosystems, and like getting my hands dirty on the practice side as a lead advisor of Evolution Limited, boutique advisory, helping companies navigate disruptive context, but also in policy as the chief digital economy advisor in the Hellenic Competition Commission. Now, speaking of AI, 2 years ago with colleagues from BCG and the Henson Institute, where I serve as an academic advisor, published a study on AI where we looked at the evolutionary dynamics of artificial intelligence. And we spoke of the drastic potential changes and the possibility that AI had to create new winners and losers. Now, this feels like eons ago because, of course, when it comes to AI, 2 years is eons ago. One thing that has changed, one thing that has transformed the landscape in that regard is that we're not speaking about AI in its traditional guise in terms of big data and analytics, but we're speaking about generative AI that has made all the difference, i.e. the possibility of not only seeking patterns through computational statistics, but being able to sift through text, document, images, as we've recently seen, in order to be able to provide answers that are correct given the context. And this is a discontinuous change. It's not only a discontinuous change in terms of what the technology can do, it is also discontinuous in terms of the speed with which this technology has been able to improve. And it is a real tech revolution which unfolds remarkably quickly. Yesterday, speaking with one of our esteemed panelists, Arka Dar, who's the head of product development in OpenAI, he was excited as OpenAI started speaking in images, digesting images, and I hope I'm not betraying any confidence saying that a 9-digit number of users used it during the first day. And that, as a statistic, is unprecedented. The take-up and the use of these technologies does stand out in terms of anything that we have seen in terms of historical patterns. Research on productivity has started emerging, and the estimates that we have seen is anywhere from 25 to 80% improvements in terms of productivity. And let me note that the productivity boost from steam engine was around 25%. So we are speaking about things that are transformative. And AI is becoming better, being able to train itself with synthetic data without the worries that we were concerned about only a few months ago. Now, it's clear that AI matters, and I suspect that a number of you are using it. If you're not using it, do use it. It's actually really fun. The question, though, is not only how we use it as individuals. The question is not even what's going to happen in terms of the specific jobs. There's a lot of discussion about whether AI will eat our jobs, and even more discussion whether humanity will cease to exist because we're going to have some weapons that are going to be created by those using it. We'll leave it to the UK government and its Bletchley Park meeting to help assuage some of these links. What we will be focusing on are the business implications of AI, thinking about how AI is going to affect businesses and how it's going to affect competitiveness. Now, if you think about what people look at, unsurprisingly, the first thing that they look at is the way in which the use of this new technology can improve their productivity. In a panel last week, the CEO of Turnitin said, well, what I will do in 18 months is probably need to employ 20% of the engineers that I'm employing today, and I will not need to have them be college graduates. They're going to come straight out of the school. So this is perhaps the easy bit, and it may even be the misleading bit. And it's the easy bit because it is this pure substitution of labor with capital, and this will create inevitably some tensions. The really interesting bit comes when you start thinking about augmentation. i.e. rather than saying that I'm going to be doing exactly the same things, how you will be able to combine the processes that you have with this technology in order to add value into the world. Now, in trying to map it, we're clearly entering uncharted territory, but we're not without any signposts. We can draw on what we have learned from previous such technological disruptions, and we can see what research on AI has already found and what history tells us about massive technology changes. Now, let me give you a few factoids that will hopefully inform the conversation and help us think about what the impact of AI is going to be. What do we know about the previous version of AI? Well, what at least we found when we looked at it, considering how AI was being integrated, is that AI does lead to new winners and new losers. The first thing that it does is it increases the inequality in terms of the profit distribution. It does help companies that are more technology friendly, and it also works for particular organizations, and that's where our big tech discussion comes in, because AI, especially now if you think about AI of the generative sort, works for what is modular, i.e. what are specific tasks that can be isolated. In the previous generations of AI, you can think about the pattern recognition. It was great because there was a lot of discussion whether AI can work better than radiologists in detecting tumor or identifying metal fatigue. Right now, we have AI that does terrific synthesizing, and by the way, rather than pattern recognition, it does the basic creative stuff, something we never expected years ago, because it excels in recombinations which are at the very core of creativity, including what it is that we teach. So when we seek concrete answers, when we have modular structures, we do see the possibility of these massive productivity gains. On the other hand, what we also know is that all of these technologies, and we know that from all of the studies in terms of the previous version of information technology, fail to deliver the long-term implications that they have when they need to be embedded. Why? Well, because technologies require a concomitant organizational change. You have the possibility of doing stuff with a technology, but the organization is not just the infrastructure, it's not just the stuff. Organization are the processes, the people, the way that they are managed, and that means that we need to rethink how we put all of these together. That is why, for a number of years, people were frustrated with information technology. We even saw that in the earlier areas of AI. What we will then see is that organizations will need to change and adapt their practices. But this is where things start becoming a little subtler in the world of AI. What else could be happening? Well, the first thing is that we see that there are a few organizations, including the big tech, mind you, that have got a much more AI-friendly background. They've got an operating system that allows them to integrate these processes, and they are structured in ways that allow them to benefit. We also see that there is the possibility of a new generation of entrepreneurial firms that will come and will be able to leverage AI in order to push and challenge existing organization. We know that AI is a little bit strange, though. It's not like other technologies. What does AI do? The first thing that we have realized from the studies that are seeing the light of day is that AI disproportionately helps the worst performers. Now, that's an unusual technology. It may change, but so far the delta is bigger for the ones that are the least performing. They are the ones that could leverage this type of help. And we also know that there is a risk that has already started being documented of people being asleep at the wheel because they trust AI rather than using their own exercise. Another interesting challenge that organizations will need to look at. What that means for the way that we organize and also for the organizations that are going to succeed is one of the things that remains to be seen. The other thing that we see is that AI is becoming increasingly effective at mass creative stuff, at synthesizing information, at contextualizing information, and at providing answers. It isn't yet great, or perhaps we think that it isn't yet great, in giving very precise answers when the stakes are high. Let me remind you that already the previous iterations of AI we did not want to use, because if a doctor makes a mistake in a diagnosis, well, a doctor made a mistake in diagnosis, people will die. If a system made a mistake in diagnosis, we are much more sensitive and, as a society, less willing to allow the decision to be driven without the human in the loop. So we do have issues of where exactly we see the human in the loop, and when the stakes are high, if we're going to be behaving differently when we have creative tasks. So that too, and I suspect that Claire, who has worked for decades in the application of technology, including AI in the healthcare sector, will be able to shed some light into that. Finally, AI today operates as a massive demo. It's been free or nearly free, and we don't quite know in which way will it be monetized. We have some early moves. Microsoft bundled with OpenAI. OpenAI continues providing its services, but Microsoft also integrates it in its own. This morning, AWS, not to be left behind, as big tech is absolutely keen to ensure that it keeps its dominance, made an equivalently sized commitment, slightly smaller, with Anthropic, an offshoot of AI, developed, by the way, out of people who were dissatisfied with the fact that Microsoft created this link. There's a bit of irony there that I'm sure is not going to be entirely lost in members of the AI community. How exactly will that pan out? The question of how the ecosystems that will be able to allow companies to take AI is going to be quite important. And in that regard, may I say that this raises issues of dominance. I think that one of the authors of the Competition and Market Authority's recent, very interesting and thorough initial go at looking at the large foundation model is here. And I think that it's a great place to look at the initial concerns in terms of competition. They are also concerns in terms of strategy. So we know that there are going to be issues like we saw in the previous version of AI, where the hyperscalers, by the way, a different name for big technology firms, who could see where value existed and change their footprint in order to ensure that they maintained their dominance and as such cement their position, are going to be very active. What else will happen with us? Well, that's where we move from the what in terms of Gen AI to the so what. So let me think about the so what. And the first part of the so what, for the people interested in what that means, is that I think that AI will challenge entire sectors and business models. So in a moment, we'll hear from Beppe Stigliano, who's the CEO of Spring Studio, in a sector which, as you guys also said, will go into the polls in a moment, may be threatened lock, stock and barrel. But this is not the only sector. I'm also the coordinator of LBS's AI task force. We are, at least in the task force, deeply both interested and concerned in terms of what AI will do for us. First of all, we need to ensure that the system is robust. People can have their essays entirely written by OpenAI, both to enter and as they are here in the school. So lots of the old ways of assessing homework or trying to see whether people are intelligent on the basis of how they fared in some criteria become irrelevant when you're able to use AI to create these outputs that, in a time-honored way, have not changed in a very, very long time. Second, how do you integrate this technology? We're starting to think about flipped classrooms, about role-playing with AI, taking different roles, and students or executives participating and engaging, because people who will be in a top business school will have AI at their fingertips. And what we need to work on is thinking about how this technology can be combined with the skills and then work on the skills that we need to produce. The same challenges that exist at the level of a top business school such as ours are challenges that exist in a number of organizations. The only open question is whether they will accept it or not, and whether they are ready to see them. Now, let me take a breather here, because I'd like to see what you told us by looking at the polls that we had through LinkedIn in terms of the key questions that we asked. So let me feed them also to our panel. Which of the following industries do you think are going to be the most significantly transformed? Healthcare is top, Claire, to note. Media and advertisement almost ties with education. We're both toast, Beppe. And finance, we don't have a finance representative here. I think the transformation of finance is very real, will happen in a slightly different way. It's interesting that I think that the large majority of you think that AI will be transformative, and I think that we probably agree with that, and that you expect that AI will transform the entire business model by a very strong majority, in addition to employee productivity. And I think that all of the above are correct. It will affect employee productivity, customer experience, competitive dynamics, and the entire business model. And it's interesting to see that we've got a very split audience in terms of how confident you are for how you're going to be able to manage this. Now, over and above the high-level impact, which is, of course, massively important, AI will also drive new winners and losers at the level of the organization. We do have to take these existential questions seriously. We have to think about how we will integrate it for our own companies. Now, if you are sitting there and you are part of a firm that has had some history thinking, I'm now toast, I'm gone. Well, the good news is you're not. If you look at the data, despite the rhetoric on this massive disruption that we have been hearing over the last 20 years, the resilience in all the major indices in the stock market has been greater, not smaller, for traditional firms, let alone extremely small movement from the big tech firms that, of course, spend a lot of advertising dollars to tell you that it's a very competitive market. It absolutely isn't, which is an issue for competition authorities. But it is also interesting that the traditional firms have been able to adjust. How did they do that? Well, they did it because what we are seeing is that the innovation patterns are changing, so that the traditional established incumbents are able to acquire, combine, build ecosystems together with smaller firms and be able to integrate lots of innovations. So there is more hope if you look at what the record is, and there is an interesting pattern in this version of AI that Anke perhaps would be able to confirm, which is that some of the earliest adopters are some of the companies that perhaps you would have thought are the old economy, flat-footed firms that are knocking on OpenAI's door saying, what can we do in order to adjust? So there is a change agenda, and the change agenda is possible, but it's also a bit of a tug of war of a set of new, more digitally able companies as they try to both compete and collaborate with the existing firms. Now, enough for me and enough of the overall views. What I'd like to do now is to turn to our panel, because we've got the luxury of having a terrific panel with us. So let me start by order of appearance. First, we've got Arka Dar, with whom I've had the pleasure of collaborating over the last few months, who is the product lead of OpenAI, that needs no introduction, and just graduated from our Sloan program while writing the software that is transforming our society, I guess somewhere between breakfast and the assignments that he had. Of course, he's also the co-founder of Zinler, and he's got other engagements in addition to that, that turn his engineering training from MIT into products. Next, in terms of the order of appearance, speaking about organizations that may be challenged, another collaborator and former student in our executive programs is Beppe Stigliano, who's the global CEO of Spring Studios, after having worked in WPP as a CEO of Wunderman Thompson, who is also has a PhD in marketing and has a new book on that with Philip Kotler that I'm sure that he would love everyone to buy. And last but not least, we have Claire Mortimer, who is Business Transformation Service Leader for UK and Ireland for IBM. And she's a senior partner in healthcare and public sector. And she's helped transform the NHS during the COVID pandemic and has seen firsthand both the promise but also the challenges of using technologies, including AI, that she is responsible for with here as well. So, Anke, let me start with you. As one of the people responsible for building this new technology and seeing what applications it had. What are the aspects of these technologies, of these products that you create that you are most excited about, and what do you think they will do in terms of transforming how organizations are structured?
All of it. Yeah. I have two questions I wanted to ask though. Does everyone have ChatGPT? Okay, fantastic. All right, and is anyone directly working in the AI world? Sort of, all right, awesome, great. It's good to know the crowd, you know? Yeah. Let's see, so, I have to go back to the days how OpenAI started. It's very much a research, we're a research company, primarily full of like PhDs doing research in computer science and machine learning. And like the focus really is pushing the boundaries of really like scientific knowledge that will help us hopefully one day usher in like a safe AGI and potentially safe ASI. And that remains our goal. ChatGPT was really an experiment that we wanted to do and see like, I will never forget, November 2022, we launched the product and we didn't really think anything was going to come out of it. It kind of took off, and then we had to quickly hire a lot of people to keep the company going and to keep producing like good products. And it's been absolutely phenomenal. What has been phenomenal was this shift of just kind of introducing a new way of getting computers to do stuff for you. Before you needed to know programming languages. We went through the whole journey of going from machine level languages to very, very easy languages, human understandable languages like Python. But now you have just literally any language to talk to a computer and get the computer to do stuff for you, even write code for you. And that is transformative. That brings in power of compute to every ordinary individual in the world. And it's a great balancer. And that's what we are most excited about. Sam went on a world tour, and he had a fascinating learning that he shared with us. And the learning was, the more developed countries he went to, he saw like a tendency not to change or get involved into anything new. And the more developing countries he went to, there was a lot more interest in trying to understand, how can this give us the edge up? How can this be the balancer? And how can this help me narrow my Gini, improve my HDI? What can I do? And the parallel is really if you look at Asia kind of skipped flip phones. And I think that's the same thing that we're going to do. Like AI is going to become the great balancer. And that is what I'm most excited about.
Terrific. Now, let me go to Beppe, because I'd like to look at applications. So Beppe, I remember we were speaking sometime this summer, and you were showing me an advertising campaign by a company that is in the entertainment business with people having fun and a very nice aesthetic product. And you said, well, look at all this, which these great actors in this great location, none of them is real. And AI is wonderful because it reduces friction. And I guess that the challenge is it reduces friction, but aren't you friction? So why is it if you can stop using people for the shoots and organizing this entire complicated production process, why don't people just do that easily with the tools that Arca gives them? And what will give a license to the creative industry to continue monetizing itself?
Well, I guess that's exactly the point, right? You've said before that in education and media advertising, we have this issue or opportunity, and we need to figure out what to do with AI. I guess that as long as it's about figuring out what to do with AI, it's still okay. The problem is the moment we start thinking of what to do or what AI does without us. That's the more interesting question. Having said that, the more I think about it, the more I recall this book that I read some time ago, and talking about the future of business. The book was like, the factory of the future will have two employees, a dog and a human. The human will switch on the machine in the morning, and the dog will be there to make sure that the human doesn't do anything else. Now, I don't think this is the future, but when it comes to my industry, being the CEO of a company, a global company in the marketing communication sector, Of course, I'm very conscious and I'm also very interested in understanding what's the future, because, if we simplify the business model of advertising, it's about content production or ideas, if you want, and delivery or distribution of the content. Technology, data processing, artificial intelligence, machine learning had an impact in the last few years on the distribution of the content, the delivery of the content. And it was great. Everybody was very happy. The holy grail in marketing is to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. So it was just great. However, ideation was still something that only humans could do. And that was the distribution. Now, generative AI is having an impact on the other side, on the production of the content, on the ideation, which is exactly what the two of us were discussing a few days ago. And so, yes, there is a huge opportunity, because until a few months ago, weeks ago, to produce that specific campaign, would have had plenty of conversations with the client, reaching out to a model agency, selecting some people, sharing the shortlisted people or actors with the client, and then we had to go back to the model agency, verify their availability, fly people from all over the world, book hotels and restaurants and a location, and then, oh my God, it's raining, so we need a backup location, we need another day, we need to change all the flights, and so on and so forth. And today, we've done the same campaign without everything else. It's just artificially generated images, and it's great. Yes, it is. However, we need to rethink our entire business model. So it is absolutely true that it's having a huge impact. For now, what we are seeing is it still needs humans to oversee. It's still okay. Not sure for how long. Maybe, Arka, you will tell me. And please call me the day before you release the feature.
1 week, 1 week.
Second, it lacks emotional intelligence for now, which is quite important when it comes to face-to-face interactions, for example, in a retail space, or when it comes to deciding whether or not you can use a chatbot. So as we all know, a chatbot is perfectly fine if you want to know whether or not a store is open, or if you want to book an appointment. But if you have a problem with your dishwasher and you want to reach out to the store because you've just bought the thing and it's broken, the last thing you want is interacting with the chatbot. You want someone who is picking up the phone, empathizing with you, and providing you with a solution in 30 seconds. That's exactly what we want. So we still need humans for now. Last but not least, what we're seeing is it lacks bird eye. It's a bit siloed in the way it works. And so, for example, going back to my example, if you have a campaign online that is not performing, one specific ad that is not performing, the machine, I don't know what to call the software, would just decide that since it's not performing, it has to be shut down, right? However, having a more like a broader view, you might end up understanding that it's not about that specific ad. Maybe there is another major factor that is impacting the entire internet or that entire category or that entire business, and that's the only reason why this is happening. So again, lacking the broader perspective is currently an area in which we believe humans still make the difference. Having said that, I believe that the competitive advantage and the source of value creation for companies like the one that I run, and in general for any business, will lay in the ability to find the right balance between what we want humans to do and what we want to delegate to artificial intelligence, robots, and softwares and machines. And of course, this balance will continuously be redefined. So it's all about trying to understand what to do and then reassess every 6 months, hopefully. Hopefully, every 6 months. The last thing I want to say, and it's something that I've learned working with, of course, my team, but also with some of our clients, the temptation is to say, let's do something because there is a first mover advantage to catch. However, this, of course, exposes companies to a huge risk of deploying money, like, let's buy land in the metaverse 6 months ago, and then, or let's buy NFTs, and then you realize that that money was just wasted. And so somebody might be tempted to say, let's try to catch the second mover advantage. Well, what I've learned is that yes, you can do it, but trying to catch the second mover advantage doesn't mean that you can just wait and see. It means that you need to start experimenting, learning, exploring alternative sources of revenues, and trying to understand how your company and your sector might evolve in the near future, so that when the time comes for you to try to catch the second mover advantage, you are ready as a business, as an organization, as a company, and as a culture within that organization.
Terrific. Claire, let me just turn to some of the topics that Beppe is considering, which is the difficulty of organizations to integrate technology. The promise of IT generally and AI in particular has been extremely elusive in the world of healthcare. We have had long hopes that things would be transformed, and some successes and some not. What can we learn from what we have seen so far, and what do you think are the key impediments to realizing these benefits on the basis of your experience?
So I think it's a fascinating statement that technology hasn't had the impact in healthcare. Actually, if you look at the NHS let's take the very British example of healthcare, right? The NHS, 75 years old this year, is fundamentally different than the NHS was when it started, and a lot of that transformation actually is driven by technology in some form. So actually, the healthcare as an industry is in a fundamentally different place, and there are lots of pockets of brilliant adoption of technology. The challenge with healthcare is that it's in those pockets, and what we saw during the pandemic was a real acceleration of the opportunity for people to take on that technology within a space where we needed a solution now. And the rules were not off, but the rules were different. And so the excuses went away. If I could solve a problem in a space and make a difference to the thing that was at the forefront of everybody's minds right now, people were started to try. And so in a post-pandemic world, we've got a really interesting position in health where you've got these we've sort of proved you can do it. But now you have to shift not just the system, right? So there's all of the reasons. The NHS and every organisation within it is a big organisation, right? And moving any big organisation with lots of people in it is very difficult. It is also fundamentally not there to think and worry about technology. It's there to provide care. So the focus is very different within health, and the people who you're working with are not fundamentally driven by what's the new whizzy gadget and what can I do. That's, that might be what people play with on the weekends. It might be what they're learning so that they can keep up with their kids, but they don't come to work to play with technology as you do in quite a lot of industries now. So they're motivated in a different way. But there's also actually the kind of public acceptability. So you said at the beginning, right, if a machine makes a decision that causes harm, that's just in our minds, the public perception of that is somehow different than if an individual makes that decision. And so the level of public scrutiny is much, much greater. Another reason why it's hard. But also the other thing is actually healthcare touches all of us. And healthcare has to provide in some form, right, equal access to service for everyone. And so a lot of what you see technology and AI driving it's a part of a digital revolution. So we're digitizing lots of services. So how do I, from a health perspective, digitalize services in a way that doesn't disadvantage those who don't have digital access? And I think but there are absolute pockets of brilliance. And I think the opportunity with generative AI, I think allows us to start changing that conversation at a time post-pandemic where there is huge public support for seeing change in the health system, because people know that we need to do something different if we are going to persist the NHS within the UK, which is a hugely kind of powerful asset that we have, but also if we're going to be able to continue to manage our own health and wellness in a way that allows us to frankly get on with the rest of our lives. So actually, it's very much a human question, and I think it challenges us all to look at, you know, the experiences you talk about in the retail space. Actually, how do we as citizens accept that health is going to adopt some of those technologies in the same way, but also how do we help the health system to create that broad access, so that those systems can be used and deployed without that inequality that comes. So I think it's not a technology problem. There are many technology challenges. There's data all over the floor. There is hugely siloed systems. There's the challenge of sharing assets and technology assets in particular across that complex system. But we could fix that given enough time and money and brains. The human piece, I think, is going to be that persistent challenge. But that will play out across many industries.
And it's great to see a more optimistic note on that. Let me just ask two follow-on questions, if I may. One of them has to do with the fact that you mentioned that there are pockets of brilliance. What is it that stops pockets from being wildfires of brilliance, is the first question. And the second is there anything qualitatively different in terms of the potential application of Gen AI to healthcare? I suspect that Alka may have some views in terms of that as well. But you know, if you could start us off.
So what stops a pocket of brilliance from becoming a wildfire? I will give you a personal opinion, and I think very often it's either fear, because actually doing something within a small space, sort of under the radar, right, is okay, but it is that fear of public scrutiny, and sometimes the rules say you can't do something within the system. So I think, to your big question of what's the kind of business model implication, there are lots of reviews and thinking that we need to apply to how do we apply the rules to enable, perhaps, wildfires is probably the wrong word in this context, but that spread from those pockets of brilliance.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that prevents those pockets of brilliance from becoming wildfires is time. Actually, people having the time and the headspace to make the change in the way that they work, to adopt those new things, to get their minds around the acceptability of different ways of working.
Absolutely. And Alka asked earlier on how many people use OpenAI. I'd be curious to see how many people use it in their businesses, because legal departments have actually, to some extent, come in and said, you're not supposed to be using that because we don't quite know what it is yet and may get us in trouble. So, you know, when you're speaking about the issues, about the rules and about who's going to be able to use it or not, there is yet another layer, and perhaps the companies that knock the door of OpenAI are not the most representative companies in the economy, and then there's an interesting question of the things that hold us back. But I wanted to go back and Alka, return to something that you mentioned earlier on of the differences that you saw geographically. In the previous study that we did with the BCG, we found significant differences in the AI ecosystem in China, in Europe, and in the United States. And it goes very sort of deep. Europe, you still see the fear of the Stasi and the post-Second World War and, you know, non-libertarian government, and government should not be snooping. Whereas in China, there is also a different sense of the individual versus the collective, let alone the power of the Chinese Communist Party, that changes the willingness to accept AI. So in China, we saw a drastic difference. You know, 70-80% were happy to be snooped by AI. In Europe, much less. The US, very much closer to Europe, but in a slightly different libertarian as opposed to individual civil freedom kind of attitude. But, you know, again, significant concerns. So we are now addressing some of these questions about what is perhaps hindering our being able to adopt it. And some of them will differ by companies, other will differ by countries. What is it that you have seen, either in terms of the difference by countries or difference by those who tend to be excited, that say, oh, that's great, and we will integrate it, as opposed to interesting, but I don't know, we probably want to keep away from that.
Yep, I think like challenging the status quo is always tough, right? So, what we see over and over again, and this is not like an OpenAI thing, I'm going to give you my personal opinion. We are always rooted in all this construction, like everything that you see around us, like we came up with this. Someone woke up and said, we need to work 5 days a week to make a living, right? Like someone woke up and says, we're going to have 7 days a week, like in the Gregorian calendar, right? And then there are a whole bunch of different calendars, by the way. My definition of a good life would be to hang out with my wife and my dog at the beach, work 2 days a week, and make a decent living, and that would be fantastic. So I think like to really understand a future with AI, we need to be willing and ready to rethink how we live our lives at the most foundation, at the foundation of things. And that is tough because change is tough. It bothers us. We have routines that we need to follow. And whenever our routines are shaken, we get really, really nervous. And we need those kind of like, we need a calendar to tell us how to live our life. Mm-hmm. Like, why can't we have businesses that is able to deliver, like 10 times the number of clients, make tremendous amount of revenue, but do it by working 25% versus how much you work now? As long as we are able to redistribute that wealth and not hoard it. But that's a totally different, that's a different problem. But even then, you're going to see individuals in firms who are going to be really good at prompting, and there'll be some who are not going to be good at prompting. At the end of the day, we have an innate need to stand out. So we'll still figure out ways to stand out. But I think I have a problem with this. This is the status quo, and everything has to fit into the status quo. That's not how the world evolves. Mm-hmm. Shocks are brought into the system, and a few are going to stand up and say, I'm willing to rethink how I run my life. And they become examples. Some of them totally fall on their face, and then the revolution stops, and that's okay. But I think like we need to be willing to say, I live life right now this way. There's a new technology. What do I really care about? What is most important to me? And then start making decisions from there.
So this is prescriptive. Let me just push back to the description. Do you see any rhyme or reason in the variance? Because there are some people clearly that are more open, interested to experiment. And as Beppe was saying, if you don't experiment, then you can't even think about how that may involve you and how you can take advantage of it. But do you see any rhyme or reason in terms of either the organizations or the geographies or the industries of people who are saying, you know what, let's try to see how we can reimagine part of what we do with the help of AI? Is there any pattern that you can see there?
Absolutely. I think I learned this example from someone and I love it. It's like, how high on the floor are you that you're jumping from, and how much you expect it to hurt? Right? So if you think you're on the 10th floor and you have made it, you're going to be much less willing to take risk and make changes. And that's a representation of highly developed economies. I'm not a political scientist. I'm just giving you my ideas, right? And if you're like, I have less to lose and I really have to figure out how to do well for my population, you're willing to take more risk. And that applies to not just countries. I think it applies to companies. It applies to us as individuals. Like if you are the CEO of a company and you have to bet your entire net worth on the next big thing, you're going to think like 1,000 times over. Versus if you are like a broke college student and you want to go and start something new, you're like, what do I have to lose? Like, I already share my house with 20 other dudes. And the worst thing is I'm going to continue having to do that for another 2 years. Versus I live in a mansion and I don't want to have to go back to sharing a house with 20 other dudes. So I think that's at the foundation of it. It comes down to how comfortable we are and how much it might hurt if you fail. And that drives how we decide a lot of these things.
True. So let me go to a dude who does not live with another 20 people in the corporate speak, but is a CEO of a company. That's a bit of a tricky spot because you've got some investors and some shareholders who are scrutinizing what you do. So they may love listening to Arca, but they're like, man, we want to see the results. And we want to consider what you are doing for the business in addition to having fun spending sprees, because you just told me that there's sort of new technology. How do you take the desire to experiment and try new things in an organization and turn it into reality? What do you do in saying, well, this is a great new technology, I would like to see how we'll integrate it, but the CEO has fewer buttons to push than people think that they do. How does it look as you're thinking about needing to keep your organization working and adjust to AI?
Well, in our case, the starting point is we live in a world where supply exceeds demand in the majority of sectors. So you still need something, a story, a content, an efficient algorithm to let people know what are the options and likely to curate a short list of options to simplify their lives. Now, if we assume that there are, each of us is different, but for some people, I have zero emotional involvement when it comes to my toothpaste. So in that case, the curation and the short list, I'm very happy to delegate that short list to an algorithm, and I'm very happy. It simplifies my life, place orders, I'm just happy. But for other things, I'm happy to have a human curation so far. Perhaps I'm following an influencer online, and that influencer is recommending some products, and I'm happy because I want to follow that specific style or that specific selection. Now, our job is to understand this evolution and understand how people want to make their choices. If at some point 80% of the choices will be automated, our job is to figure out what to do. So to go back to your question, it's all about learning by doing and experimentation, and it's all about trying to convince my people and my shareholders that it's absolutely fine that we are experimenting while we are doing our job. And it is the same way you would do for whatever business transformation or digital transformation, as we used to call the process a few years ago. It's all about trying to find the right balance between some quick wins in the short term, so that we try to embed a specific technology like the campaign that we talked about before, and we start delivering projects, and that projects are paid. So you can prove that you are doing baby steps in a direction, and this is all about experimentation, so that if there's a shift, like a big one in the medium term, at least you are equipped, while simultaneously deliver against what you're doing now. So it's all about, if you want, organizational ambidexterity. And I always say that my job is not the CEO, not the chief executive officer, but it's the chief calibrator officer. So my job is to calibrate the speed, the length, the entity of change, assuming that change is the only constant. So it's either we change or we extinguish. So I don't have an answer, but what I'm trying to do is this ambidexterity and this baby steps and learning by doing, so that we can constantly fine-tune the value proposition. And I can, again, reassure my shareholders and my people that we are still doing our job, while simultaneously we try to, again, experiment and learn from our own sort of mistakes.
Or perhaps another way of framing it would be to say that we've got different time horizons in terms of the threats and opportunities. There's the short-term time horizon whereby AI may affect your ability to operate, or the options in which you operate. You know, the sort of homework example, if you take an academic institution and the conditions that exist there so that you are running in a more efficient way, while you've got the medium-term question of in which way will your skills change in order to make them relevant for technology.
Correct.
While you have to also think about the long term, what is the role that you need to play in terms of society. Because one of the exciting bits, and this is where it becomes really interesting, Arka, that you're speaking about essentially issues of purpose and issues of what society allows us to do, or mandates that we do. And these are the most resistant to technological change. In most of the world, we still have the continuation here in Europe of the guilds, which are these societies that have exclusive rights, lawyers and doctors who are the only ones who are allowed to perform medicine. Well, right now, one of the interesting questions, when you have the possibility, and we go back to the medical profession, and the triage can happen as a combination of people, as the NHS has already done much more effectively than it used to be doing a couple of decades ago, having automated systems with people who don't need to have the stamp of approval of the doctor to do the basic triage and support and expand what the system does. We have seen that sometimes it is the institutions that may be quite important, which is where also regulation may end up being quite important. Not only do we have regulation in terms of AI for how it's going to be structured and distributed and the ecosystems and whether the ecosystems are going to be fair or unfair, we also have regulations in terms of how it is integrated in organizations. So Claire, if we go back to examples like that of healthcare, what is it you think that will allow these new technologies, and in particular generative AI, to make a difference? What is it that you think is the most exciting dash, the thing that is the bottleneck that if we get, we're going to be able to see yet more transformation?
So I think actually what we've seen with what generative AI has done, which previous kind of iterations of the technology have not managed, is it's captured the imagination. It's actually, you know, my parents are looking at ChatGPT. You know, my kids are looking at ChatGPT. Everyone is looking at ChatGPT. They didn't look at previous technologies in that way. And I think because it has captured the imagination, it allows us to look at a system like the health system and not just look at how do we do things differently with this technology, but how do we do different things and to really change quite fundamentally how the health system functions. The big drive in health, in order to reduce the cost of providing health at the moment, is a shift towards what they call population health, right? So actually you start to manage your own wellness rather than relying on the system to manage your illness. And actually generative AI creates, I think, a space for really accelerating that kind of conversation because it starts to encourage us to engage with the system in a different way.
Going back to what you were saying, Arka, technology is, AI democratizes technology and almost thinks that even in terms of the programmers, and think about, you know, your own sort of work in programming, it feels that we have a world whereby software engineers who used to be the equivalent of scribes in medieval monasteries, having the vellum and being able to pass the knowledge and being indispensable, will soon enough become less indispensable, at least for some activities, because you will have conversational ways of creating programming and leveraging technology without the need of this sort of reified intermediary. What do you think technology has in store for us?
Yeah, I wanted to, like, you know, even just when we think about like healthcare, like delivery of healthcare is like, I would in my world, like it's a very small part of the healthcare ecosystem, right? Like there is drug discovery, there is like drug interaction findings, there are clinical studies. These are extremely data heavy. Like I know like scientists who have spent years just trying to do meta-analysis to understand drug interactions. That is solved in 5 minutes now.
Yeah.
Like you can have a huge corpus of drug interaction studies and you can converse with that corpus. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
Like you can have 20,000 documents and have a conversation with a model that represents the knowledge behind those 20,000 documents. That was not possible before. So I think, like as you pointed out, and thank you, I actually, like, again, like going back to my original point, just having a conversational interface with the computer, it sounds simple, that's the game changer.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now we're turning to the final part of our time together, which is questions. So do feel free, we already have some questions that have been sent by Slido. If you have any questions, we'll try to see whether we can put them quickly in. I'll just start with questions and whoever wants to take them. The first thing is, will businesses need new roles to oversee the ethical and legal considerations of AI? And Arka, we're starting with you as the producer.
100%, yes. I think it's it's the same thing. If you think about pillars to support like the work of AI, you're going to have someone who needs to understand compute really well. You need to have someone who understands the science of deep learning, someone who understands data. They sound like foundational, but the other two foundational areas are all things to do with policy, ethical issues, understanding the boundaries of model performance, all things like safety systems. Those are as important as compute and data and science of deep learning.
I would question whether it's a new role or an evolution of role and skills in many industries that are already there. And I think one of the dangers is that we put AI in a little box on its own somewhere separate, and we transform the world with that new technology box. And actually we forget that the world we're transforming is one that people have lived in for a long time, and there's a huge depth of knowledge that we need to connect. So I look at actually how do we evolve the knowledge, the skills, and complement, perhaps some of the roles that are there, rather than creating something separate.
And avoiding the risk of reinventing the world, especially when some of these ethical considerations have been with us for a very long time. So we should not simply say,
I totally agree with you. I think like the huge context of knowledge that we already have is very important, but there is a very important like a pivot that we need to make, which is, if you think about moderation, like Facebook has thousands of people who goes and moderates posts. But moderating AI is totally different because it generates, like how it's not, doesn't exist and now it exists. So where do you bring in that mod? So I think there are like foundational pivots that needs to happen, but totally with you. We need to like build on the huge context that we already have.
Completely.
Absolutely. Let me turn to a more businessy question. How can small to medium-sized businesses implement AI in their products and services without breaking the bank? I think that, Aga, if you want to make a pitch, you can make a pitch now.
They already are. Look, like at least for OpenAI, we are a profit-capped company, so our prices for our products keep going down. And it's not, you don't need to do anything fancy, right? Like you just have to like sign up and slowly develop your prompting skills. And I have spoken to small businesses who are already benefiting. Like you can never, in a small business, if you're running like a corner store, you're not going to have a CFO. You're not going to have like a VP of strategy or like a chief people officer, right? You don't have those expertise. They were never even within like your reach before, but now it is. Now you can actually, maybe not the full scope of it, but you can ask questions that can leverage the expertise of all those individuals without actually having them in your payroll. So again, it's going to be the great balancer. You're going to see corner shops which like start actually getting into competition with Tesco's one day because they can do more. They will have better knowledge of supply chain and they're going to be small and nimble. They're not going to go down the path of like an academic exercise to understand the impact of AI. Instead, they're going to just go and try experimenting and doing stuff. Did I just use the academic word while sitting at LBS in a negative way? Sorry.
Point.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Well, there is one thing, I mean, we talking about all the sort of positive implications, and I'm quite sure everybody's thinking, yeah, but what about the dark side? So I think we should mention also.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the dark side, and I'm not talking about, like jobs that will disappear. I'm literally talking about very specific, easy things. So, and again, in terms of positive side, it's incredible, and I agree with you. I've just finished my book, and I could copy-paste the chapters as soon as they were done, and I will ask ChatGPT to play devil's advocate, to challenge my sort of the chapter, my thoughts, and that was great because that helped me. So on the good side, let's say positive side, I'm absolutely with you. At the same time, I know that there are tools now, AI, machine learning, and also sort of visual tools, which allow people to. I'm speaking a language now, and I could just film myself, wait 30 seconds, select another language, and look at me speaking Greek. And my lips would move in a way that is exactly, so nobody would at some point I would say 6 months, understand whether or not it's me, whether or not I can actually speak another language. So of course I'm concerned. What if my daughter calls me or video calls me in 2 years, and she asks me things, including why don't you make me a wire because I need some money and I'm having a problem and whatever. How is it scaring? Yes, of course. What we are not equipped to do as humans, and so probably it'd be good to talk about it, is we tend to focus on the evolution of one thing and we lose track of the evolution of all other things that will benefit from the same technology. So I'm scared, yes, if I receive a video of my daughter asking me for help or whatever, At the same time, perhaps in my phone, there would be embedded a feature released by you guys that helps me understanding whether or not, like an antivirus, understanding whether or not that's a real content or not. So I just wonder how hard it is to predict the future.
Well, and there's the regulation too, right?
And there's
right
the
now,
regulation too,
in China, I think we had the first people imprisoned for false information. Now, of course, the question is what exactly is false, and where do you draw the lines in terms of what is false and what is inconvenient truth, to borrow Al Gore's line. But I think that if you look at the standards that came from there, they're quite interesting and quite bold in trying to resolve what will be a very real issue. There is a problem of confusion and disinformation, which goes hand in hand with the power of the technology. Yep. And we cannot shy away from that. And I think that the reason that you see everyone I know in the AI world saying, yes, we need regulation, the question is what sort, is that this is absolutely evident to everyone there. And that connects to another very thorny topic. I don't know whether there's any views on that. Arka, I suspect that your OpenAI hat might limit you from answering to that, which is how you're coping with IP rights. So as there are cases currently being discussed, perhaps I'm going to see if anyone else says, perhaps even in terms of generating a marketing campaign using AI. What's the IP consideration there?
Well, they're huge, clearly. Yeah? There's a strike in the US that's been... Well, again, it's hard to predict, but it's clear that either we find a way, and let's go back to regulation, like some sort of watermark that says generated by humans or not, which is an example of potential solution, or we need to reinvent the whole system. What if we create a song, a campaign, a script, a storyboard, an entire series with an AI that is able to predict the way viewers will react, and it perfectly fine-tunes and select and does the auditions and selects the right actors in a way that is just perfect. It's already there. It's already happening. Yeah. So I guess I don't really have an answer, but the point is either we find a way to regulate and to put a watermark there, or
I mean, I should know. I mean, there are currently a number of sort of big lawsuits going on from GitHub, and there's also authors that are taking all the big AI companies to court, saying, "Hey, you used our data, would like a share." Some of them say would like a percentage, like we have in the case of Google and people that are doing the news and would like a cut in that. Others are saying that if this automates our job, it essentially embodies our job. And I think that the next few months, we're going to see things that will shape the landscape. And I think that this is one of these open questions, because the landscape is still rather fluid. Exactly. It's fluid in terms of monetization, and it's probably not going to stop here. It's fluid in terms of ownership, and competition authorities are just starting to look into that. It's fluid in terms of the how do you ascribe the benefits that you see, and how do you pass on these to those who have included it? It's fluid in terms of the types of AI that you are allowed to. Let me go to something that may be a slightly less politically charged question, which is that AI is only as good as the data it's being used to train it. What kind of data standards can be put in place to improve reliability of AI in businesses? And I think that's a question for you.
That's not a totally right understanding of generative AI or how neural networks work today. One thing, actually, I can't talk about that in too much details right now, but like it's, you briefly mentioned like synthetic data. Majority of training today is done using synthetic data.
Exactly.
Which is where the model is itself classifying what is right, what is wrong, or what is good, what is bad. And then there are a whole bunch of other filters that is kind of in the training run for such things. So I don't think that's a correct way of looking at LLMs today.
Great. On the other hand, as I did want to field this question, but I think that the question that becomes more relevant is slightly different, which is that there is a possibility of training your either something that you have produced or something that you have refined, whether most of the work may have happened from the foundation model, but then you may have the refinement that happens from what the additional overlay onto your own data, which then becomes more relevant to you. So it's not the training itself that we are concerned with, not the foundation model, but what is sort of further downstream. And here there has been a question of whether that might lead for organizations that have a deeper, either codified or simply existing data to generate a better type of insight, and as such, improve their ability to leverage that than the other startups. So this is what I see as this very interesting dynamic. On the one hand, you could say great, because as you were saying, this is a leveler in the sense that you've got startups with access to this data. The technology is very easy to scale, so you need some complementary skills, and then if you find someone with a big base, you can tack onto them, so you combine with an existing player, and it's great. But at the same time, there is an informational advantage for large players, including the players that are working with you, that are saying, this is data that is ours, and we will be able to leverage them. How do you see that being played out? How do you see the two forces that are essentially the ones that are going to be shaping the competitive landscape for tomorrow ultimately being played out?
Yeah, I mean, really, like our third-party strategy does involve like, you being able to connect your data sources to get the most out of them. And it's a misunderstanding to also think about that data is automatically used for training. Like, no, we just need to have an inference from that data to make a decision on what should be the output. But you see, like, we're getting at the foundations again of, like, we are always gonna, every individual, even without a company, like every individual is always gonna seek a competitive edge. And it's gonna come out in all kind of different ways. It's gonna be a data advantage, it's gonna be a prompting advantage. At a country level, we're gonna have like energy advantage, ability to access GPUs, having enough silicon. So I think it's going to be that kind of a competitive landscape, like no matter what we do, right? In some interesting way. How it pans out, like as a company, we are going to try and produce the best models that are super useful. And those best models will be used by other companies who are sitting on huge corpus of data to have their own edge in the kind of like in the business world of things. But I think for us, what is important is the models that we put out are more intelligent, more smart. They have more context. They have more knowledge. And
I think this is I was speaking about modularity earlier on. This is the definition of the modularity in terms of a strategy. We're looking at our own module. We believe in the innovation of those who will complement us in other modules. We're creating an open API. To some extent, this may also be an interesting side effect of the model that OpenAI has as a result of its both charter and sense of mission, and it'll may end up being different depending on who is it that is.
Like I can share an example, and actually it's really related to the. So just yesterday or day before yesterday, we announced a partner, like a new product that we deployed with Spotify, where if you go and look at any of the podcasts, the podcast is in your own language. And to me, that is great. Like language is an incredible barrier right now. And what happens is they have these tons of podcasts and you can just pick a language and the experience is not like of a subtitle or a dubbing. It really feels like the accent, the annotations, it really comes across. And that is to Spotify's advantage. They have 350,000 audiobooks. They have 100 million tracks. They have some number of million, basically they have 70 trillion tokens worth of data. And they have decided that I'm going to use that and make it more accessible using this and opening up like all our podcasts to 198 languages, right? Like,
but what you just said was really fascinating, right? Because it's not about who's got the solution or who's got the data or who's got the idea, it's the partnerships. And I think that's the shift that we're going to see is much more is it's not one organization that's going to make the change. It's how you create those partnerships. I think will be fascinating to see how the technology really evolves.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of like very interesting IP come out in terms of how these partnerships are structured. And where does the data sharing and insight sharing happens. Yeah.
And as I see a deep red little sign here in terms of the time, that means that we have seconds to go. I think that this is a wonderful place to end this conversation that could go on for a very long time, because I think that what we are seeing is that there is a need for new sets of partnerships, and I do expect that the shape of the ecosystems will start being visible soon enough, but also a need to rethink both the strategy of individual organizations and the value add of business models and sectors. We're in the beginning of seeing this transformation happen. I do expect that there's going to be much more about that will happen soon. We're going to be trying to be in the center of it here in London Business School. In terms of both research, applied research, and also our programs that you can see online. But please be part of the conversation. We would be delighted to learn from your reactions, because I think that conversations like these are the ones that are at the cutting edge. And I hope that you will agree that that has been a fascinating way of spending an hour and a half. Please join me in thanking the panel for a terrific job.